the Know Your Place podcast. We are on episode 79, if you can believe it or not. I've been on hiatus for a bit. Now I basically do this in a consulting fashion. No, I take requests and then I record is how I do it now because I'm just too darn busy. All right, it has started recording. Hello, everyone. Charles Altendorf here, and we're back at the Know Your Place podcast for episode 80. And on this week's episode, I'm bringing on a guest to talk about Washington D.C. and Ottawa, Canada. So, say hello to the fans, Moses.
Hey, folks. This is Moses here from Ottawa. It's the capital of Canada. I know, considering how big the states are, you might not know much about Canada and Ottawa by extension. So I'm happy to answer a few questions, go over a little bit of what the city is like for people. I live mainly in the suburban end of the city, but I travel a lot to downtown core a bit. So, and I've seen a little bit of the rural side of Ottawa. So I'm happy to answer these questions and break some of the misconceptions that you see on social media.
Awesome. So when you proposed coming on, I actually knew a little bit about Ottawa before we had even met, Moses. But I'll have to say, the first time I really got any exposure to Ottawa was actually from listening to the Toronto-based show The Q. And it was unfortunately when they were talking about what happened with that terrorist guy that ran around there that time. So that was a bad way to get introduction to Ottawa. But since then, I have learned more about Ottawa. And before I did a little research before the episode, and I looked up Washington's DC metropolitan population, and it's 6.3 million. And I believe Ottawa is actually a comparable size, ironically.
So here's the thing. The general population of Ottawa is about 950. We're looking at around 940 to 950,000. But if you add in the city of Gatineau, which is it's a weird situation because it's like a whole nother province or state. But it's kind of usually a bit a part of Ottawa. It brings the population to about 1.4 million.
So yeah, y'all are a little bit smaller than DC, but it's not like let's see, I'm trying to think of a capital that's relatively small in comparison to DC. I guess you could say somewhere like, ironically, Brasilia is not really that large, although it's getting bigger now, finally. But, they did stick it in the middle of a jungle. So, so that's cool. So I guess to lead off, is there any sort of lead things you want to really put out there about Ottawa? I can go into sort of details about sort of what I think are the culture and similar things, but
you want to go first?
You want me to go first? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So really, when you talk about DC in America, first of all, it's the 6th largest metro in America. So it's a top 20 metro. And it's funny, one of our mutual friends that we're in a chat with was talking about what makes something a large metro in America. And I think DC really is the prime example of that because it has rapid transit and it has 3 international airports. So that's sort of where we're hitting this next level thing, right? And it has sort of a couple big name colleges like George Washington University and Georgetown and American University. And so that's sort of like just sort of surface level stuff. Does Ottawa have a lot of the same things in that regard?
So Ottawa is actually the 6th largest metropolitan in Canada. If we combine Gatineau, if we don't, then it's still 6th. But what we're looking at is it's a similar size. There's a few schools, and the fact that Ottawa is the capital of Canada and has its parliament actually helps it attract quite a few students actually who go to their two universities. The University of Ottawa, which is more downtown itself, but the other university is Carleton University. Carleton is probably closer to the suburban end of where I live. But Carleton actually has a major program called, it's short for PAPM, but I believe it stands for Policy Analysis and Policy Management. And actually, two of the former graduates of that program are actual elected members of the Canadian Parliament for the Conservative Party of Canada.
Okay, that is interesting because I do believe I've heard of Carleton before, but I didn't connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings it all together for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then of course the other thing I think with DC now is it's finally got all four major sports in America, which for a long time it didn't. But now, for a long time, it was mainly known for the Redskins, and now they're the Commanders now, I guess is what they're called. I have to get used to that. And then the basketball team, the Wizards, they used to be the Bullets, but they changed their name from that because they didn't think it was good to be called the Bullets. And now they have the Nationals and they have the hockey team too, the Capitals. So it's really weird. That really puts them in another level of Metro, having all four national sports.
Ottawa does actually have sports, but probably on the lower tier. So we have our Ottawa Senators hockey. We have the Ottawa Senators hockey team, which is the NHL team.
Right.
We actually have. We actually just got a few years ago, back in 2019. We actually got a basketball team, the Ottawa Blackjacks. And not a card, not like the Vegas, not the game blackjack, but a black and a rabbit actually.
Oh,
so
okay.
the logo is like a rabbit, which is actually really kind of creative. We have a soccer team that we actually created a Canadian Premier League team, and it's called Atletico Ottawa. And its sister club is actually Atletico Madrid, based in Spain, La Liga.
Oh.
And I'm not sure. I'm not much of a football fan in American football, NFL, but we do actually have something comparable called the CFL, which is the Canadian Football League. And Ottawa actually has a team called the Red Blacks. Now, yes, the name kind of, I'll be honest, is not ideal, but our previous team was actually called the Ottawa Rough Riders, but Saskatchewan took that.
Okay. So that's it seems like that Ottawa is participating in all major sports in Canada too. So there's a lot of similar things I think going on between both cities, but they are both capitals, so you would expect that. Now, as far the one thing I think that there's several things that set DC apart from any other city in America, but one of the big things that sets DC apart, and I'm curious to know how much of this occurred in Ottawa too, but DC was a very centrally planned city from the jump. You know, there was a grant made for this amount of land, and it was going to look like this. And Thomas Jefferson, who was the third president at the time, even played a very personal role in designing it. I don't know if you were aware of that prior to our convo, but
no, I was never actually.
Okay, well, it's really funny actually, the story behind that. So they hired a guy to do it who was from France, who was a sort of a landscape architect type. And Jefferson also had studied a lot about that. So there's lots of rumors that Jefferson and this guy left all these symbols in there from the Freemasons. And that's sort of where the impetus with the movie A National Treasure kind of was born out of that. Because there are all these jokes about oh, the rotunda's facing this way, so therefore it was the Freemasons.
No, we do not have any of that. And other than in Ottawa, I would say we do have something called the NCC, the National Capital Commission that kind of deals sometimes with federal matters. But in terms of the city planning itself, Ottawa is its own city, but it's actually under the provincially, it's actually it's more provincial. They manage things like the municipalities fall under the provinces in Canada's constitution, actually. So the feds maybe have some small part, but they don't play much of a day-to-day, except for like the affairs of except for the area of Parliament Hill, which is basically the equivalent of the Capitol Hill for the states.
Yeah, and that's actually the next thing I was going to roll into, and this is probably the largest difference, is the actual land that Washington, D.C. sits in is considered federal property and not a part of any state. So there are like rules and laws that people have to abide by living in D.C. that are not state laws. And actually, that's why you see people drive around with these bumper stickers from Washington, D.C. that say taxation without representation, because if you live in D.C., you don't get a vote in Congress or the Senate or Congress or Senate.
Which I think is kind of weird, actually.
It's extremely weird. It's very bizarre. And it's extremely bizarre when you think about, I don't know if you've seen what it looks like on the map, but have you ever noticed how it takes a chunk out of Maryland but not out of Virginia?
No, I haven't. I can't say I haven't, actually.
No, so it was originally supposed to be a square that was evenly taken out of Virginia and Maryland. But what they did was Virginia somehow, and I still don't understand how this works because they were the larger state by far. They massaged it so that their side never became part of the federal lands in D.C. So there's two big cities on the other side, Arlington and Alexandria, but they are part of Virginia. And it's really weird, like stuff you would associate with DC is a lot of it's in Arlington. So like, for instance, Dulles Airport is on the outskirts of Arlington, or the FBI headquarters is in Arlington. So, and the National Cemetery is in Arlington too. So Virginia's completely milking that. They're getting the taxes and having that stuff there.
Yeah, I know. They're getting based on that. Like, Washingtonians are getting a raw deal out of it.
Kinda, yeah. They're getting a really, really raw deal out of it. So, but yeah, that's the other. That is so there's been a lot of fighting and wrangling in Congress, and it always comes up periodically about, I think most people in America are finally starting to say they think Puerto Rico should be the 51st state, but there's been people before that have argued for D.C. becoming the 51st state. So,
why not just have them both be have them both be the 51st and 52nd?
People don't like change. No. I don't know what the argument is now why they refuse to add any more states.
I could think of from a GOP perspective, wouldn't it make more sense to say because here's the thing, Washington's probably going to vote overwhelmingly Democrat.
Oh yeah, right? No, that's what the main argument is that it would be like adding 2 blue states. That is the argument.
Maybe though, here's the thing, maybe Puerto Rico. I'm not sure the political climate, but maybe Puerto Rico might have like might be a bit more purple, maybe more geared towards blue, but maybe a certain.
I think over time Puerto Rico has more of a chance of becoming purple. That being said, it's a crazy thing. I personally believe if you're a part of our government, if you have to be subject to our government, then you should have full representation within it. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, and I get that. One thing I would actually like to do, I was actually this idea I had before, but if you do for Washington, here's an idea. There's 100 senators, and under the U.S. Constitution, the vice president casts the tying vote, right?
Right.
Why not actually have it so Washington gets the state of have it be the state of Washington just gets one senator, so that there's 101 senators elected.
Yeah, that's another thing they could do. But again,
Yeah.
This kind of stuff requires a 2/3 majority with a 3/4 ratification. So odds are pretty low it's ever going to move.
Oh yeah. Does it actually, like, quick question? Do you actually need both of them, or just one or the other?
You need both if you amend the Constitution, which this requires. So yeah, you would actually need both in this particular instance. So like minor laws, how they get around doing that for like minor laws that are federal laws, and that's sort of where this is going way on a tangent, but this is where sort of like this and how the Constitution is interpreted kind of comes from, because it says that there are the enumerated powers clause says whatever isn't laid out in the Constitution is divvied to the states. And then there's this other one called the elastic clause that kind of means like some everyday to day running things of the federal government shouldn't need constitutional amendment status to happen. So, but it really, that's when you get in this big gray area of what you interpret that to mean, right? So adding another state, that kind of feels like something that should be, the larger vote rather than the smaller one.
Yeah, it's actually funny. Speaking when you talk about the Constitution, amending our Constitution is actually hard. I think it would be much harder than the states, because for us, we actually had this thing back in '92 called, I think it's either Charlottetown or Meech Lake Accords, where the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney tried to amend the Constitution. So what happened is so he failed so spectacularly. He took the Progressive Conservative Party, who has been a fixture of Canadian politics from 1867 till 93, and that party went from 154 seats in Canada to guess how much?
None.
Oh, actually, not bad. Actually, too.
Ha! Wow. Yeah, I mean, you really got to be careful what battles you're going to pick. I do think that they could muster the support. There's been a lot of talk with the Convention of States movement, which basically, if 3/4 of the states get together, they can call a convention to change the Constitution. They don't need Congress to do it. So I think they could get enough behind that for term limits, but I don't know what else they could get.
Actually, what I would do is, speaking of term limits, I would actually have them change it so that the president can only serve one 6-year term.
That'd be an interesting change. I don't
think
that
no. But it's like, what, the senators, they serve 6-year terms, right?
Yeah, so, the senators have the longer terms. Congress people are only 2 years.
I mean, we'll probably have an election in another year or two.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'll sort of meander it back to the original topic in my good manner of steering the ship home. But yeah, so the big thing I think that is hard for outsiders to understand is basically there's like 700,000 people within the actual city limits of DC that don't have representation in federal government, yet are subjected basically to federal government rules a lot. So that's wild. And so from my understanding, you're saying most of Ottawa is under Toronto law.
No, so I do got to correct things, right? So Toronto is the capital of Ontario, right?
Oh, I mean Ontario law, yeah.
Right. Yes. So Ottawa is subject to, for the most part, 90% of the laws are mainly under the provincial jurisdiction. But there are areas in our Constitution under Section 92 that outline the responsibilities of the federal government and the provincial government. So, for example, criminal law is actually under the feds. So criminal law Yeah, so I think it's easier. So someone in Burnaby, BC will have the same criminal law as someone in St. John, Newfoundland. So that's like going from California to Florida, basically.
Yeah, I don't think that would ever happen here. That would be completely different to what America's like. I mean, they tell you gotta read up on the rules of what state you're going to, because you could get caught doing something you didn't think was illegal.
Believe it or not, you could like still get illegal. There are illegal things you could do. Like, for example, in Quebec, believe it or not, you know how in 2019, Canada legalized cannabis nationally, right?
Right. Yeah.
So believe it or not, certain edibles, like if you try to buy pop brownies in Quebec, that's actually illegal.
Gotta have their fun little caveat there to arrest somebody for.
But like I said, if you live in Gatineau, you're just gonna drive to Ottawa, and no cop is gonna really. I mean, unless they're an idiot, no cop is gonna just look at like every facet of your car, right? You can literally just, it's like putting in the SUV, your groceries, and then you just head back home.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so more on the sort of, so I guess now that we touched on sort of the basic, I don't know, demographics or stats of the places, we haven't really covered the breakdown completely demographically, but sort of just the structure of the cities. I thought we would get more into the cultural side of things, and
sure,
unfortunately, despite all the there's people who talk about, there's a lot of good things about DC. I don't want to come in here and totally trash DC, although, there's always people out in my neck of the woods out in Kentucky always like to make the jokes about, we don't need to build a wall around by Mexico. We need to build one around DC. But one of the unfortunate aspects of DC is it's really received a bad label for crime. There's certain sections of DC that are very, very poor and been very bad for a long period of time. And I was curious, that actually seems to happen in a lot of our capitals in the U.S. And I don't think that really happens in Canada.
So Canada. So here's the thing. Ottawa is I would say it's a pretty safe city itself. And like, I was looking up some of the travel, like, it's a very safe city. Like, I mean, I live in the suburban end of Ottawa, but most general crimes are more in probably the other side of the city, I would say. But I think if we're talking the major cities, I think because there's such an economic hub, it's going to cause things to be more expensive, for example. And I think that's what's going to lead to more crime, right? The more expensive the city, you're going to see more crime as people are trying to find ways of surviving.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does. So maybe I've always wondered though if there's just something about, this is sort of like a crazy thing with me, but like my theory is that it takes so much sort of like low skill labor to prop up these capitals that you're always going to have an inherent inequality, and that's going to cause more crime. Because like, even like, for instance, Frankfurt, our capital in Kentucky's only got like 20,000 people, but it's got like a higher than average crime rate in our state, And like, somebody there, one of the homeless people stabbed a homeless shelter worker,
Oh my
God. I'm like, that's something that would happen there, right? Because they're more likely to have a homeless shelter there, but they're more likely to have homeless people, So that's my theory about it. I'm curious what your opinion is on my theory about that, is that there's just an inherent inequality in capital cities.
I think so. I mean, here's the thing. So it's not our capital, but Toronto, you're seeing more people, more immigrants coming to Toronto, and you're seeing higher immigration rates, right? So because they think it's a hub of Canada. But at the same time, they're going to learn quickly that it has a huge affordability crisis. And if you really want to tackle crime, you need to tackle that affordability crisis.
Right. Yeah, so that's sort of my theory on that, and I think that's why you see such high levels of crime in DC. And it's really unfortunate because there are a lot of good things about DC, but I don't think it'll ever shake that problem, unless there's some. And the thing is with DC too is it literally is limited on land, so
Yeah.
They can't go anywhere. So,
and the thing is, I actually just pulled up the numbers. Like, I could only find just quickly the number for homicides in Ottawa was about like not even 20, maybe like 10 homicide victims.
Oh man, that's nothing compared to DC.
Yeah, if we applied the homicide, if we apply the homicide rate per 100,000, it only gives you up to 2020. Let's see, where's Ottawa? It's like 2.04.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess if we're gonna play that game, I can see if I can find it for DC. But DC used to be in like the top 10 in America. I think it's gone down a little, not because it's gotten much better, but because some other places have gotten worse.
And I think as you see more cities going with greater income inequality, you're going to see more crime.
Yeah, here we go. Murder rate. Okay, so it's saying per 1,000 it's 0.29, so that would put it at 29 per 100,000.
Wow, that is pretty bad.
Oh, it's bad. Like I said, it used to be top 10. I don't think it is anymore. I know, like traditionally, when you talk about the absolute worst now, it's usually some St. Louis, Detroit, or Memphis now. But it's up there.
I think. Well, I mean, also too, like getting a gun in Canada is. I mean, I think this is safe to say it's easier getting a gun in the States than it is getting done in the U.S. So in Canada, so it's so much easier in the States than here.
Yeah, although a lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of those crimes, because they end up becoming usually gang related, they're not even legal guns anyway. But that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, I don't want to touch that. Like, I don't think I've even come close to encountering anything like that in Ottawa. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't say you would. Again, 10 per, or how many did you say? You said 2 per 100,000. Yeah, you probably don't see that very often.
No, or even I even mean gangs and stuff.
Yeah.
Like when we heard of gangs, it was like, oh, this is something we saw on the TV, or like I heard of the Crips and Bloods from South Park.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there are gangs in DC. There's gangs in a lot of major cities. So, I guess the other thing I was going to talk about. So there is an inherent. You were talking about inequality before. So the sort of southeastern side to DC, and this is really unfortunate. One of the absolute worst spots is next to the major naval base. It's called Anacostia. But then the contrast to that is on the northwest side is where American University, Georgetown, and George Washington are. And I mean, that's where the Obamas used to live, up that way. And you can just see, there's people there, boatloads of money, right? And, again, that's, like I said, for me, what it is, you just got to think about, like, a congressperson makes that much money, but then you got to think about all the people under a congressperson that prop them up and how many little menial jobs there are under a congressperson, right? And I think that's where the inequality comes in there.
So here's the thing: our politicians. So Justin, Prime Minister Trudeau, gets his own house, but yeah, I mean, he's rich enough. His dad, so he's a trust fund kid, so he doesn't need to worry about money beforehand. Other politicians, we've had doctors. I mean, even a few years ago, we actually had a bartender got elected to parliament.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can speak. I can speak great things. I got to know her a bit, but she was a really good representative. But like, yeah, you make what 180. It's between one. It's currently 180, but I think at the time it was more like 160, 170,000. But they usually just get like apartments and they get that subsidized, for example.
Yeah.
Except for the leader of the opposition, who's the leader of the second largest party. They actually got a place called Stormway.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, they make about 250,000 Canadian. Ottawa's GDP is about 41,000 American. Sorry, 45,000 American actually.
Oh, per capita income, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
basically. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there are areas like if we're talking Westboro, which is really rich. Westboro is really rich, and then there's certain parts of the city. I forget where, but it's. I know it's an M. I think it starts with like an M. It's not Manitic. Rivers, not Riverside. I'm just checking right now with my sources right now. Rockcliffe. Rockcliffe. That's like that's where if Obama, that's where the Obamas of Canada would probably live.
Yeah. Are you ready for the disparity in DC?
Yeah, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, so in 2017, the median household income in DC was 77,000, but at the same time, 19% of the residents were below the poverty line.
What's the poverty line in the state?
It's like 40K.
Ooh. I used to make under 40K a year, and it sucked. It absolutely sucked. So I don't know how you raise a family under 40K.
So you can imagine the disparity there that creates that average to be that high.
I know, right? And it's like, yeah, especially with like current affairs, it's going to make things even harder.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just what I'm pointing out. There's quite a disparity. As for I guess I will do the full. I will get the other demographic comparison out of the way. DC is 40% white, 40% black, 11% Hispanic, and 5% Asian.
Wow. I actually have the demographic break. So with Ottawa's demographic breakdown, it's actually about 69, 70% white, with about 7% black. I'll give you a more breakdown. So obviously, yeah, we'll go with that. 8%. Sorry, not 8% black. Sorry, it's 5% black. Right. And yeah, so the rate. Yeah, so it's not the word. It's like let's see. So, yeah, so we're looking also about. But the thing is that yes, it's such a huge majority, but you never you never go around to Ottawa and just see only white people. You're guaranteed to see black people, Arab, South Asian, Southeast Asian, for example.
Well, this is really interesting. DC is actually its black population is dropping, and its Hispanic and white population is growing. That is not a very common demographic trend in America. Yeah, in 1970, it reached its peak black population at 70%. Now it's down to 40. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's wild. That is really wild.
That is.
But yeah, I mean, I guess it's just getting so expensive to live in DC that.
Yeah, you know, right? And the thing is that, like, I mean, right now, the numbers I gave you were from 2020. But if we're looking at this, I'm just checking right now Ottawa census population from using Statistics Canada, because we actually just had a recent census, actually.
Mm.
Yeah. So obviously, and if you ever want, I can send you the data.
Right. Yeah.
And I can send you the data, but for looking at this, believe it or not, we're looking at we're barely looking. We have a decently sized. We have a decently sized indigenous population. So the indigenous people of the area would I believe, are the Algonquin people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
And
there's not many of them left, of course, in DC. But when I was in Wisconsin as a kid, there were still some indigenous people.
And speaking of which, that was actually one of the schools. The colleges is actually called Algonquin College.
Ah, there you go. So,
which I actually attended.
Well, there you go. Now we've learned it all. We can end it right. I'm kidding. So I guess the other thing I wanted to dive in a little bit with culture. So the in a way, DC has always kind of had an identity crisis about whether it's northern or southern, because it is on the line of Maryland and Virginia, of course. So, and the really funny part about it is, right? So when we had the Civil War, Virginia seceded, right? So, and they put the South put their capital in Richmond, Virginia. So literally, DC was staring down the guns the whole war.
Wow.
So
I don't know. Yeah, that wouldn't really happen in Ottawa. Ottawa is a very people. Okay, so I think Americans would think Ottawa is a very left-wing city. It's actually not. Ottawa is and to be fair, it's more of a center. I think it's more center left, maybe center right. A very populist right would probably struggle to do poorly in Ottawa, actually. Itself. Our downtown wards, for example, are where we see more of the really left wing. For example, in one of the ridings, which is Ottawa Centre, actually elected probably an unavowed leftist. Like, I'm talking, this guy would probably make AOC from the Squad look conservative.
Well, DC kind of has a reputation in the actual DC. You know, they did paint a big BLM thing in the middle of the street. So
here's the thing, right? It's our leaders are experts in saying everything but doing nothing. Like, we had Trudeau. We had Trudeau literally take a knee on during when we had the George Floyd protest in Ottawa. So, and then where people were like, and we even had some leaders saying, why are you doing this? You're the prime minister. And here's the thing, we have issues I think with policing in Canada itself, but definitely gets more amplified from the States as well.
Right. So I guess that's the other cultural thing I would like to tap into a little bit. DC does have a reputation of just there being protests all the time. Like, when I went there on the tour in 5th grade, right? They're like, this is the protest area that we have gated off by the White House here. Like, there was people there every day protesting, right? So it's not even just we have big ones too, and there was the Jan 6th thing, and then there was that BLM one that was pretty big recently, right? But it happens all the time. Is that a thing in Ottawa, or is that more of a state thing?
No, that's actually a really good thing. That's actually a good question. I was actually taking a walk downtown, actually, and I ran by Parliament. We do have so the way our Parliament is designed is there's actually an outdoor area of grass, an outdoors grass area. Sometimes you'll see people. We have free yoga classes on the hill, but when people protest, they are usually there. We do have, I mean, minus the convoy. I can't really say the convoy was a huge aberration of what Ottawa really is. So, I mean, I did see a few. We had one, a few anti-Communist Party of China protests. Sometimes I've seen some protesting about Armenian genocide.
Nice.
You
Yeah,
know,
we've had that here too.
some, but usually for the most part, we're used to protesters. We welcome protests in the city. It's just we we hate like the truckers, the convoy. We hate. That's not what we want. Like Ottawa has,
And that's why I wanted to
for a
touch on
city.
that subject a little bit since I had you on
Sure.
here, because I think it really is more inherently part of the DC culture that
Mhm.
there's just going to be wild protesters sometimes. Like people, the funny thing about the January 6th thing, well, not funny. I mean, I don't think it's funny, but the irony of the January 6th thing was, of course, that is not the first time anything like that's ever happened. You know, there was a big protest after the Civil War when Union troops felt like they didn't get paid. And then there was
Oh,
another one after World War One as well. So, you know, I don't know. I just think it's more in the culture that there's more aggressive political people in DC than perhaps in Ottawa.
honestly, I think that's really it. Like most people in Ottawa just want to live their life, go to work, put food on the table, go out with friends and hang out with family and live their life. But I mean, right now we still vote. We actually just had our provincial or state election as well, and we actually have our upcoming municipal elections coming up in October.
Yeah. So do you think that there will has it felt like something has changed now in the psyche there in Ottawa since the convoy thing, or do you think that
Uh,
that'll just fade away into the past?
so, like, honestly, some of the people. I mean, I actually saw a guy with an Alberta and "Don't tread on me" flag. And, yeah, as I'm walking by, as I'm just sitting enjoying my time outside, and it's like we usually don't get these type of people.
Right.
So certainly, I think some Canadians are actually really, and no offense to American people. I mean,
Right.
we want a good relationship. You guys are our neighbors, but like we don't like some of the politics that comes out of your place. You guys have an overwhelming influence, actually, um, in our politics. So we actually have. So anything that goes wrong, like if something like I've heard this phrase, and maybe you've heard it a lot of times. When America sneezes, Canada catches a cold.
Yeah, I would say it seems like, in particularly over the last, I don't know, at least since I've been paying attention to politics, it really feels like in the last 10 years that our politics have really started to sort of like dominate and pervade not only into Canada, I'd say into the UK a lot too now.
Maybe that's why. Because here's the thing: you guys like the Cambridge Analytica scandal. I think
Right.
they used during Brexit. They used Cambridge Analytica.
Right. It was a similar. I mean, the parallels between the Brexit movement and sort of the I don't. I'm even a little hesitant to just call it the Trump movement because I think it sort of started more with the Tea Party movement prior to that, right? I
Yeah,
think there's so many parallels there, and I think it runs through the convoy thing as well. And you know, it's really kind of weird for me living in middle America because, like, you know, for me, I just see this stuff as like everyday stuff I see. There's Joe over there that thinks that DC is part of a globalist agenda, right? But like, you know, when I talk to you all in Canada, especially you in Ottawa, now having experienced like those kind of protesters on your doorstep, like you're like, where in the hell did these people come from, right? Like, yeah,
yeah. And here's the thing: believe it or not, actually, so like we recently it was announced two of the organizers. One was Tamara Lynch, and I think the other was Pat King, were who were the original convoy organizers. So I think the thing is, some of the citizens of Ottawa are kind of upset that they keep getting bail, but they keep
right,
screwing it up. Like at this point, we're basically pulling a. You might as well put money on how long it takes for them to screw up and go back to jail.
right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
That is
here's the
generally
thing.
what happens with any of those kind of groups. What you know, like for instance, you know, back in the day, a lot of people were upset with and scared of that Richard Spencer character, right? And
Mhm.
after a while, he just started doing stupid stuff and got arrested.
Yeah,
That's generally what happens, and it happens with both sides of that extreme. I've seen it happen with organizers of, sort of extreme left wing movements as well.
the thing is, our left is, I'm gonna be honest, it's actually quite neutered. Our left is really neutered. Like,
Yeah.
I
No, I
kind
haven't
of,
really seen extreme. That's what's so weird about sort of that rhetoric is no, I've never really seen I've not seen people like Antifa is here or something over there. Like
no, we don't really have, and this is the thing, we don't really have many of them actually in Ottawa too. I think
Mhm.
Toronto is probably more of a rife area for that
Mhm.
stuff, because I think Toronto is more like in, I don't want to really use the word much, but I'm going to. Toronto seems to be more woke kind of thing.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I do agree with that. I think Toronto. Well, honestly, I think Toronto and the middle part of Ontario now is becoming almost entirely influenced by our politics. It just seems like it's starting to become a carbon copy of the other side of the lake.
Yeah. Like, even, yeah, like, I mean, Windsor's probably got, but the funny thing is that Windsor doesn't seem to have gotten a bunch of it.
Yeah.
And Windsor is literally right on the, like, we're talking the Windsor Detroit border.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah,
like,
I just thought that I think that's really interesting, and it'll be interesting going forward for your city. Whether or not it becomes sort of a, I don't even know how to describe it. Here, DC really does feel like front and center stage. You're going to see the political fights even play out in the streets. Like
no, I don't. The thing is that I don't think it does that. Like, I think many or most of our leaders are, even most of the people are more, they're less likely to, that's not really much likely to succeed itself. Like, I mean, like, you might have, like, for example, New Democrats who are, frankly speaking, the AOCs of Canada, for
right,
example, who, like, maybe if they see someone on the floor, they're not gonna advocate like beating up a Trump supporter kind of thing. Like,
right,
maybe socially cancel, like, stay, but like, or isolate or stay away from them. But they're not. We're not advocating for like death to conservatives. We're not. We don't. I don't think
right.
we're gonna get to that point.
Yeah, I do think Canada's a bit more tame in that regard. It is kind of weird though. Like the weird thing for
But
me when I think about DC though is that like people want to. The thing I don't like, I guess, is that people want to act like this is a modern thing that happens there now, and really, I could argue it's been happening since the inception of DC. Like,
you guys
there's been riots all the time over stuff.
you guys have the, like, I think the, I mean, okay, the wheel, I'm not going to use the Stanley Cup riot, but
Yeah,
because that doesn't really matter. But the biggest major riot I think in our history was, ironically enough, in Winnipeg,
right, right,
which
yeah.
is like the biggest for labor unions actually,
Yeah,
which was
labor.
yeah.
That used to be where riots emanated from a lot back in the day. Was the labor unions and their fights with the owners.
I
Um,
think I also think our the fact that our style of governance versus the state DC's is kind of insulated a bit more, because our government is a first past the post system where the leader has more power. Like, honestly, I think this, and they, maybe Americans aren't going to like this, but if Trump had that kind of power that Trudeau has, for example, can you imagine Trump, or let's say Paul Ryan, for example, kicking out Marjorie Taylor Greene, or like,
yeah,
or, and the thing is, he doesn't need caucus approval. He can just do it. He could say, Laura, if you don't vote in favor of this pro-choice legislation, you're getting
right.
kicked out of the party.
Yeah, that is something that's been interesting for me to watch. I would say y'all are a little more tame about it, but in the UK now, it's really starting to become a thing with that. Watching the Conservatives axe their leaders after a year and a half all the time is wild. That would not happen
Oh,
here.
actually, funny enough, it did actually. So we actually, the way our leaders got hacked, and we actually had that, ironically, not for our government, but for the opposition Tories.
Right.
So we had, for example, we had one. So after Stephen Harper stepped down because he lost the election, we had they elected Andrew Scheer, who is, frankly speaking, let's just say that even a piece of toast has more charisma than this guy. And then he had a bunch of scandals. Like, he fell into a trap. Trudeau basically outsmarted. Trudeau basically dunked on this idiot, basically, by making him look, during an election debate, bring up abortion. And yeah, the Tories ran up the score and won the popular vote, but they only won a few seats extra, maybe like 20 seats more. So then what happened is he got, they found some dirt that he was using money from the party to help fund his kids' private schools.
Oh.
And so they used that as an excuse to basically force him out. And then, so this was, he was out by, we had our election in 2019. He was out by mid 2020. And here's what, and then ironically enough, we have Aaron O'Toole, who is probably more of a moderate conservative, probably a bit more pro-choice, pro-LGBTQ rights, for example. He ran against Trudeau in an election, and he lost, I think, like 1 or 2 seats, for example. But many of the people hated how they thought he talked about both sides of his mouth. So what happened is he actually got a caucus putsch. I think that's how you say it. Like, you know, the beer hall. Do you remember that Hitler's beer hall putsch?
Yeah,
it was kind of something like that. Basically, the caucus actually now has a power where if 35% of, I think it's like 15, 20% of MPs in the caucus send a letter to the caucus chair, they hold the
that
ballot.
sounds exactly like what the UK Conservatives do. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it was called through the Reform Act, ironically introduced by a more moderate conservative to empower the backbenchers. But so Aaron O'Toole got booted out as leader, and he couldn't even continue serving as interim leader.
That's wild. No, I mean, we have, of course, seen some shifts at the top of the parties before here, but nothing quite that dramatic that quickly, you know.
Right.
And I don't know what's right or wrong, you know. I mean, I think it's cool that y'all can do that, because on the converse side of that, you get things like here where, you know, Mitch McConnell has been in leadership in the Republican Party since before I was born. You know,
that's the thing. Like, how does he keep staying in there?
You know, like, people just don't. So, you know, he gets elected by the state of Kentucky. Yeah. So there's just people. I mean, and I don't know what it's like other places, but here, you know, people just are that. They don't want change. They will just keep it. Like, you'll literally talk to somebody on the street here who's a regular Kentucky Republican, and they will tell you like hundreds of things they hate about Mitch McConnell. But I guarantee you, they went in there and they checked that box last time. You know?
Oh my God! Like, I don't know. I think there's like only one in Canada. There's only one MP who's been in office for as long as I've been born. Longer than I've been born, actually.
There are multiple people here. I just use Mitch McConnell because it's the most glaring example. But, you know, the
ironic part, but what's actually sad is more Canadians know who Mitch McConnell is than any Canadian senator.
I bet they do. I bet they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's so like I said, I guess when the thing I really do think of with Ottawa, and it's sort of like with Canada in general versus with DC and America in general, is it really seems like emotions are a little bit more temperate in certain ways. At least it doesn't. You all may do certain legislation that I would consider more extreme on certain topics, but it's not like political disagreements spill out to the street the same way. You know?
No, like sure, we have like the people who are like loudly like, oh,
Right.
you know, like on social media you'll see like the hang Trudeau kind of thing, but honestly, no one really is like that no one is like that in real life. Most people are like, you know what, I'm not a fan of Trudeau, but I don't hate him like that. Or
Well,
most
I should say
people,
they're not. It's not like leadership of any serious movement there. Whereas, like here, I mean, you literally had Trump in front of a bunch of people calling an election illegitimate. Like,
so yeah, if that happened itself, I guarantee if a conservative politician tried to do that itself, I can guarantee you that they would be overwhelmingly defeated in office. Like,
yeah,
I'm talking like
yeah,
super majority.
yeah. That didn't happen here. It is. I think also it is sort of though. There is a general mistrust, I think, of DC, and I think that, unfortunately, I think that's because of the way DC was set up to be this like federal island in the middle of America,
Mhm.
So, whereas I think it is kind of nice that Ottawa's a little bit more integrated, so I think that does clamp down on that feeling a little bit,
So yeah, and what's actually interesting is, believe it or not, Ottawa actually would have been Ottawa proper itself would actually was actually smaller, much smaller, if we're talking land size beforehand, because one of the former premiers or state governors actually did what's called an amalgamation. So imagine if like I don't know, like a Frankfurt, imagine little counties and cities being forced by the governor to lump into one big city, for example.
Oh yeah, there's been before, yeah.
Oh wow!
It doesn't go anywhere here though.
Like Toronto had that. Mississauga was its own town, and then now Mississauga is actually part of the Greater Toronto area.
Well, in Louisville, here, our largest city, they basically did that where they had it. They said it was kind of a vote, but they did. Well, in some of the older suburbs, they did some tactics that I would consider were underhanded. But basically, now all of so we have our government layer cake typically goes cities, then counties, then states, then federal. And Louisville, our largest city, it was starting to lose population. So what they did was they basically annexed anywhere in the county that could not fight to stand on its own. So you got like little pockets of some cities that still retain their autonomy, but largely most of Louisville and Jefferson County are one entity now.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And you can imagine how, for me, the dirtiest tactic in that was actually much older. In the 30s, Louisville swallowed this city by its edge called Highland Park, where it was an old railroad town. And then in the 90s, the airport wanted to expand there, and they used eminent domain to seize the land and kicked everybody out of that neighborhood. And now the land's vacant. They never built anything.
So, like, why not use that to help with regard? Why not use the land to help build maybe affordable housing to help? I mean, or build some extra schools. Maybe it's just maybe it's the social democrat in me, but like you could make so much more. You could do so much more with the city, with the state, with those resources, and turn it into more of an economic hub.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of the intention, and the airport did grow. It just didn't grow in that direction, and now it's a big UPS hub. But still, I mean, so that's sort of like the thing. I don't know how to describe it. In America, you see I think that's what's created this mistrust of larger government entities is you just see so much abuse of power repeatedly, and that really makes you hard. I've said to people, I made no joke about it. People who listen to my podcast know I'm a libertarian, but I've said to people I wouldn't. Part of it really comes from, like, if I were in other countries, I don't think I would be as libertarian. It's especially here where I've just seen so much abuse of power without control, and that's why there's, I think, fights spilling into the street in DC, and I think
Mhm.
they'll continue to happen for long. I don't see how they're ever going to slow down.
You know, that's an excellent point. Like, here's the thing. At least in Ottawa, right? It's
Right.
actually quite easy to talk to your MP.
Right.
I mean, okay, maybe if you're prime, if you live, maybe if you're prime, if your MP is, and like even the prime minister is a member of parliament,
Right.
so it's easy to find. Like I've known events that my member of parliament has thrown.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, I can go down. Someone can go downtown. They could go to a pub and actually get to meet an MP. Some of them
Right.
go to university club campuses, for example, which I've seen. It's actually they're quite approachable. And the thing is that yes, there's that polarization. There is, which I'm not going to lie, but it's actually not. It's actually quite. They're quite accessible.
Yeah, and I mean, some people are approachable here too, but the issue is just with in our Congress in particular, it's one representative for 735,000 people. So you can imagine, even if they're approachable, there's a lot of competing interests there.
In ours, it's actually 100. It's usually about. I think it's like every 100,000. There are
Right.
special cases in terms of the territories. Like Yukon has a population of 35,000, but the land is really huge. But at the same time, you can make the case. Yes, they deserve a member of parliament. So Yukon has one. The three territories each have their own MP. PEI is actually the really big one. The total population is around 150,000, but Prince Edward Island has 4 members of parliament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
so you see, that's a much more representative, you know. Yeah.
and
So
also our elections, like we don't really have the issue. Gerrymandering isn't as big of an issue in Canada as it is in the States because we have a independent body, Elections Canada, who and the chief electoral officer and the deputy chief are the only citizens not allowed to vote.
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anywhere in the world that has quite the gerrymandering things happen as we do. I don't know. Is there any other country in the world that has gerrymandering like us? I'll go look it up. I doubt it.
Maybe there is a chance, but honestly, I don't really know.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's been a long discussion too. So I guess I bring that back to the central theme is why I think DC sometimes it does feel like a very intense place, and I think it is because of a certain level of mistrust the rest of the country has for it. But then
Mhm.
you do see other people. I mean, you see movies and things all the time where DC is celebrated and held up high, and um, it'll be interesting to see how we come back now after sort of this very populist revolt from both sides in the last 4 or 5 years against the
I
institutions. Because
I think we're still at the beginning of it.
like with, for instance, like it's a very stark contrast to me seeing like both a Biden and a Trump in comparison to like what Ronald Reagan was like with DC. Like Ronald Reagan called it like the shining city on the hill, right? And I don't think Biden or Trump would ever say something like
Can Biden even remember DC?
that. So
Yeah, and the thing is that and the thing is, Ottawa's a fun city. It's a good city. It's like you could bring your kids and have a great time. You could come to school here. Like, funny enough, our tuition's probably university is about 9,000 a year.
oh yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I know, but like it's 9 grand a year. But you have a lot of access to co-op, for example.
Mhm.
And then even the Algonquin is maybe 5,000 a year.
Mhm.
So and the thing is, I think there's this misconception that Ottawa is this radical place. It's not, and it's a welcoming place. Um, even, for example, you could be part of the LGBTQ community. You could come and grab, like, you could go to a restaurant, buy some food. No one's gonna care. No one's gonna care at all. Everyone's too busy living their own life and stuff. But you're not gonna see like anyone or like walking into like, hey, Trudeau this, Trudeau that. No one does that in real life. That's just online larpers.
Well, yeah, that's good. I was gonna sort of, I noticed my thing dinged me that we had 5 minutes left on this recording, but I was gonna ask you what you would sum up and say about Ottawa, and you pretty much hit it. Is there anything else?
If I had to say, yeah, Ottawa is okay. So Ottawa has the main slogan of Ottawa during the convoy was "Make Ottawa boring again." But it's not a boring place. You just have to look harder. Do you love to skate? Do you or your kids or your family love to skate?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a general question I was asking. For example,
I like to skate.
Do you know, for example, we have the largest canal, the Rideau Canal is actually 63 miles long.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
And during the winter, we call it winterlude. We have like ice sculptures. You can rent some skates, go skate, pick up some hot chocolate and beaver tails, which are pastries, not actual beaver tails. During Canada Day, there's a lot of fireworks. There's music events, sports. We're trying to build more of the culture. There are museums, and even the tours of Parliament are free. There's a lot of good local restaurants itself. Like, come on down, come enjoy Ottawa. It's a really fun city. Winters kind of suck, but you'll have a great time.
Yeah, and I guess in parting, what I would say about DC is there is a lot of history there, a lot of culture there. There are still good things to do, but I really would say you have to pick your spots. And I'm not even trying to be necessarily a Debbie Downer or a negative person or something, but if you're gonna go there and expect it to not have some of that element of hyper politicism, you're foolish, in my opinion, because there'll always be something going on there, and maybe that's just the way we settle politics in America, largely.
And I think that's a screwed up thing. Like, we don't in Ottawa. No one's going to care about your politics. You could probably go an entire lifetime without having to deal with actual form of politics.
Right.
Yeah. Although we do have, I think we have the problem with Ottawa is that I think we have a sense of lack of vision. I think, in that all our leaders are kind of stuck in the mud. I think that moderation is kind of causes our leaders to be very boring, bland, with no foresight to plan for long term. Like, believe it or not, we just got light rail maybe a few years ago, and our transit system actually went to a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I think that is if there's sort of, so everybody understands sort of, I think, what they think the negative aspect is of the American Revolutionary about just really boring, turned out of the bureaucratic crank, and sometimes just really lacking a sort of vision,
We have a guy, one of the mayoral candidates is, I think, 80 years old?
Okay. 80?
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. And they used to serve as mayor before, like they were in politics for as long as possible.
I bet he uses the same speech.
Probably, and he's probably going to lose big.
Well, hopefully Ottawa can find a way to maybe get a little bit more vision without having to get quite as revolutionary as America.
You know what? Yeah, honestly, I think that's probably the best fit. And Now, I hope if you ever decide to visit Canada, start off with Ottawa. There's even it's a 1.5 hour drive to Montreal. If you want to see an even more culturally vibrant city too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about Montreal too. So, yeah. So I guess that'll about sum us up here. Like I said, it's been great having you on, Moses, and
Thank you.
I don't know. I guess I do think everybody has to see DC at least once, but you really ought to. You gotta check what's going on, and you don't want to come and get caught up in something like a Jan 6 or BLM riot while you're there.
No, no, I don't want to be that. What's the DC like? What Ottawa's biggest food thing is actually shawarma itself. So we probably have the best shawarma in all of Canada. And Montreal will probably try to compete with us, but what's the food scene in DC like?
It's basically worldwide. I mean, it really is a good culinary melting pot. Ironically, back in the day, a lot of the dishes were influenced by the French in the beginning because Jefferson had a lot of ties to the French. So the DC has always been known of sort of having almost high society culinary experiences that were sort of somewhat incompatible with the rest of America. So it really is just like I would say it definitely feels like it's world class, like, which is kind of part of also feeding in that mistrust from outsiders thing as well. Like, I mean, that really is like, if you think of like just the fanciest way that your favorite dish could be made, it's probably made that way in DC. Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, it's been a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Oh, great. Come on in. I love having people on and I love talking about things. So it's what we do here at the Know Your Place podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the record, everybody. And thanks for listening. And we'll see what I concoct for my next episode. Bye.
All right. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
All right.
Check out the Know Your Place podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word, or on Facebook at facebook.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word. And we will be coming soon to YouTube and iTunes, and maybe another social media platform near you. Special thanks to my wife, Sarah, and Jay Graff for the riff.
Bye.